Hi, welcome to today's episode of Live Healthy Now. I'm joined today by a lovely guest, Debbie Caudle, who is going to chat about something that I know impacts so many of us, especially women, who often talk about feeling that they're just not on the path that's meant for them, that somehow they've ended up living a life, as I call it, by default rather than define. So it's a great topic that I'm looking forward to exploring with Debbie today. Debbie's a therapist and coach, and she helps women to find the right path for them so that they can live a full and limitless life. So welcome to the podcast, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. And as I said, it's a topic that I'm really interested to chat about because it's certainly a big part of my backstory and something that I see with lots of clients
Yeah.
who are looking to make changes to live a fuller, happier life, but are just not sure, where to start and also what's going on. But before we dive into that, I'd just like to get to know a little bit about you by asking what your most impactful healthy habit is.
Wow, what a what a great question to start. Um, I guess the most healthy, impactful habit, just off the top of my head, that I think that for me is that I go into every day. I- I'm a big picture girl, but when I think about the big picture, I find it sometimes too overwhelming. So I focus on what I want to accomplish overall, but then with each day, I just focus on what am I doing today that's moving me towards that big picture. I don't allow myself to dwell on all the things that need to be done, all the things that I haven't accomplished yet, all the things that are ahead of me. I only let my brain focus on today.
Yeah, and that's a big piece of coaching and helping people to move forward with change, isn't it?
Yeah.
To take those small steps, which can be very powerful. And was there anything that you did to help you become this way? Because for many of us, it's something that we're not automatically or naturally able to do, are we?
Yeah, you know, I like to use the metaphor that women are like butterflies and men are like buffalo. And and I use that metaphor because we as women, we we have in many ways that aerial view. We can see we we often are far more intuitive. We are very relational. We have many things going on. We are multitaskers for better or for worse. We um, are often caregivers, and we are defined so much of the time as women by our nurturing capabilities. So we have a lot of things on our plate, many things going on in our heads. I don't think my brain ever shuts down. I'm sure you can probably very much relate to that. Even when I'm sleeping, I feel like my brain is still working, thinking, processing, coming up with crazy stuff. But there's never a moment where my brain has nothing in it. But on top of having that aerial view, we have incredible sensitivity to situations that we're in. And that sets us up to worry a lot. We often, I think I see in a lot of women, myself included, this tendency to jump ahead to the future and worry about what tomorrow is going to bring. And then that stresses us out. We start to forecast, what's coming, or even catastrophize about what's coming. And and that fear can do one of two things. It can motivate us if we have a healthy grasp on it, or it can paralyze us. And I think that is what can keep women so stuck in a certain path of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something you so right on in that the fear can really hold so many women back because you you become more afraid by going forward in time and worrying about all the things that could go wrong. And it's not just the next thing that might go wrong, but the thing after that, and then what that means, and you've catastrophized and created this whole
Yeah.
tornado of what ifs and awful, worrying, overwhelming thoughts that make you stay stuck where you are. And that brings us nicely on to what we are going to talk about with, the challenges that we see. You as a therapist, you've worked for 30 years as a therapist and helping lots of
Yeah.
different people in lots of different situations, and myself as a coach, and seeing how people can just be so stuck and not know what to do, even though they know they are very unhappy and that it doesn't feel right. But often that not feeling right hasn't even begun to kind of click with them. They haven't had that penny drop moment that's part of the issue, is it? So kind of, yeah, share a little bit about your story and how
Yeah.
you've become so passionate about this specific area of
Yeah.
supporting people with.
My story, yeah. I love my story, even though it's filled with its own pain and agony. I was married for almost 24 years. I married not, I mean, I was just barely 26, but I was a very young and naive 26. I had never really had a serious boyfriend before I married. And I had gone to a private Christian college where it felt like, it wasn't true, but it felt like everybody was marrying outside of college except me. So by the time I was finishing up graduate school, by the time I married, I I really thought that I was going to be single for the rest of my life. And I look now back on that, how silly that was. But the decision I married to marry the person I married was partly out of fear, fear that I wasn't going to find anybody else. And
Mm.
even though we were very different, um, I was enamored by those differences, but I didn't have nearly enough experience with men and being in relationships and self-awareness to understand, the choice I was making. So fast forward, to about 20 years into this marriage, and I had always wanted to be a mom, but I had lost 2 pregnancies, about 4 and 5 years into the marriage, and then I never had the opportunity. I never got pregnant again. So I sort of defaulted into becoming a career woman. I already had a career, but I always had this intention and this plan to be a mom, and I had it all worked out in my head that, I was gonna work part-time, work from home, figure it out, maybe homeschool. And that never happened. I was never blessed with children. So I poured myself into my work and I became, of course, very good at what I did. But I was also married to somebody who didn't have the same educational background as me. He had only completed high school. He'd grown up in a very poor environment and his value system was very different from mine. He would have been very content to just stay with the standard of living that he'd grown up with because he didn't know anything else. And my desire, I'd grown up very differently, not wealthy, but my parents are educated. They always pushed us to want more for ourselves. And so as I, pushed for us to do those things in the marriage, I ended up being married to somebody who he didn't like conflict at all. And he let me make a lot of the decisions. And we ultimately went into business together. He gave up his job as a contractor to come into the counseling practice that we had at the time, because at the time we were using horses, and he, loved that lifestyle. He'd grown up with horses. He fancied himself as a cowboy. So he very willingly gave up his work to do that. The problem is that the bulk of the income rested on my shoulders because I was the clinician, I was the provider of services. And I found myself feeling very resentful over a period of time that I was responsible for so much. I was responsible for providing services. I was responsible for the paperwork. He had no interest in learning how to use a computer. to help me with, any of the office work. He just wanted to be, with the horses and handle the ranch stuff. So we had employees. I managed the employees. I did the billing. I did the paperwork. And I, I found myself changing. I was so stressed out. And you know yourself, when you have a business, when you own your own business, it's not an 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 job. It's a 7 day a week, 24/7 job, because even when you're not at your desk, you're thinking about those things, right? The buck
Mm.
stops with you. And I found myself, I found myself feeling more anxious, more stressed, but also becoming more irritable, at times angry. I found myself closing down on my husband, and the less he was willing to help me and the more things that I had to do, the more resentful I was becoming. And I got to a point where I stopped believing that he could do anything to help change this situation, that I had to do it all. I had to make the decisions. And the turning point for me was 10 years ago, actually, 2013, because I made an announcement to him and to everybody that I was going to step out of mental health. But then I immediately felt fearful, like, well, what are we going to do financially? Everything's resting on my shoulders, or so I felt. And I started to have back problems. And through the whole year of 2013, my back problems got worse. I could barely sit through 2 hours of working with clients without being in agony. I would come up to my home because we worked below our home. I'd come up to my home and I would I would be doing everything that I could do without popping a bunch of pain pills to try to stretch, try to, ease the pain. I had all these different, I'd, use a tennis ball. I do all these things, but meanwhile, my back was just getting tighter and tighter. And then I started having panic attacks. And I'd never experienced that. I had worked with people for years who had panic attacks, but I myself had never had them. And I got to the point as that year progressed where I realized that I was so wrapped up in the fear of all the what ifs that I was creating my own anxiety, my own panic attacks, but I was also creating some of my own physical health problems. And I finally just had to say to myself, Debbie, you have to let go. Whatever happens, if you guys lose the ranch and you end up in bankruptcy, if whatever happens, you have to just let it go. You are not making this situation better by trying to come up with all the solutions on your own, and it's going to be whatever it's going to be.
Mm. Wow, there's so many parallels between your story and mine. Very different in the
Hmm.
detail of how our lives have been, but
Yeah,
very, very similar in that path that we were both on with our husbands at the
yeah,
time and the way our relationship was. And did you feel throughout those 20 years, which is a very long time to spend with
yeah.
someone and to be in a marriage, did you have those feelings of this not being right for you?
I never did, to be honest.
No.
I well, I loved my husband, and interestingly enough, because I am a therapist and I worked with so many people in their marriages, I always saw situations that seemed so much worse than mine. And on top of that, I was married to somebody who has a tendency, or at least when I was married to him, to be very sort of critical, but in ways that didn't really register with me as you know, it something being wrong with him. So for example, he loved to he's very extroverted, but after a long day of clients, I would be tired. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted some downtime. Well, he would feel very resentful if the TV was on, even if I wasn't watching it, or the radio was on, or I wanted to read a book. He wanted conversation. So if I was doing any of those things, he would make little sort of negative remarks. And that would play out in other ways of our marriage. Why are you doing this when you should be doing that? Why, they were just sort of little digs. And interestingly enough, I I believed him. I believed I just needed to be different. I needed to, because I could feel myself being
Mm,
more resentful. I could feel myself getting angrier. So there must be something I needed to do to
mhm.
change me. So I got myself into therapy. I was actually seeing a therapist on and off for 8 years in the space of this marriage. And not once was I saying to her, there's a problem in my marriage. I was trying to fix me because I could see that I was becoming this woman who was controlling and bossy and
Mm.
unhappy, and I felt very defensive about it, but I also felt like, well, this isn't the kind of woman I want to be, so I need to make changes.
Yeah, it was kind of a big smile, knowingly nodding as you were saying that, because that was me too. I felt as though I was the
Yeah,
problem and that I was
yeah,
at fault and there was something wrong with me. And
yeah,
like you, I also had a lot of physical symptoms that were related to my mental health problems, which I didn't associate and put together at the time.
mhm.
But it's so important for people to hear what we're talking about now, to reflect on that, because we can miss those physical symptoms.
Yeah,
And I've explained I was a very logical person, and so to me those physical symptoms just had to be caused by something very physical going on inside of my body, that there
yeah.
was a cause and that symptom was the effect. So to then realize many many years later that that wasn't what it was about, and that's not how it
Yeah.
works. It was enlightening to realize that,
That
because
it
of
was
where I'd got
connected
to. And
to,
yeah,
to your
yeah,
relationship.
but it
Yeah,
was also like, oh my god, how did I miss that? Because I spent so long trying to battle both the physical symptoms and the problems that existed in
in
how
the
I
relationship.
was.
Yeah,
Yeah, not just in the relationship but life. And I think, you know this is something I know we wanted to touch on, was the professional versus personal life,
yeah,
because for many of us we end up separating those out, don't we?
yeah.
And that can put even more stress onto us, and even more, and have an even bigger negative impact on how well and healthy we are, can't it? Because we almost become these two different people. And you see, many professional women who have these great careers and are very powerful, and strong influencers and leaders in their workplace or business, but then at home it's a very different story, isn't it? And that's very
It
damaging
it
to live like
it
that.
yes, and I think for me, what made it so damaging is that I really felt like I was on my own. We were in business together, but if I talked to my husband at the time about what my needs were, about my stress level and what you know, if I asked him for help, he was very defensive about what he was willing to do and what he was not willing to do. And so I just it hardened me inside. It made me lose a lot of respect for him on top of being angry, but it also made me extremely self-reliant. And now that I'm remarried, I'm married to a man who's completely opposite. He's an amazing partner, but I still sometimes find it difficult to let go of of all the responsibilities. He wants to help. He's very capable of
Mm,
helping. And as I begin to turn loose and trust him with the things that I've had to do by myself for so long, it's like this amazing release that I feel. But I struggled with it we've been married 3.5 years now. I struggled with it in the first, well, I mean, there are times I even still struggle with it, and we talk about it and laugh about it because he's just incredibly supportive. But there was such a lack of trust before, and a belief system that I formed over all those years of I have to do this myself. And it changed me. And now I'm trying to I'm trying to be competent and capable, but still soft, soft as a woman, willing to let my husband make decisions, lead in ways that I want and need him to lead. And because I
Mm,
need to be able to look up to him, I need to be able to respect him, I need to be able to admire him, and I need to let him be the man that God intended him to be, right? I don't want to be in charge of our relationship or of, certain decisions. He definitely respects my opinion and lets and needs me to make decisions about the business, but there are so many things that I want to be able to turn over to him that I've had to just let go of. And it's been this internal battle in my mind of, Debbie, you're married to someone now who's absolutely trustworthy and safe. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to share my worries and my stresses with. I can let this go. I don't have to do this all on my own anymore. And I
mm,
think this is hard for women who professionally work out in a man's world. They're competing with men. They have to show up in a certain way with men. And then in their personal lives, they've also been disappointed by, maybe they're in a relationship that hasn't met their expectations. Maybe they are going from relationship to relationship with men, and each time they have their heart broken and they're disappointed, they're let down, they're forming impressions about men in that way too. And it does have this tendency to change our perspective.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And, those belief systems that we all have and often, stem way, way back into our childhood, but then are solidified even more through our life events as an adult, especially when we get into relationships. It's just so challenging to change, but because you're aware of them, that's just such a huge piece of
Yeah,
progress in itself, isn't it? That you at least can recognize what's happening and why you think in that way, and know that it's something you're working on and you're sharing it together as well. That's such a key part of it, isn't it? To both be aligned and know that this is something you've got to work on. And for myself,
yes,
I'm in a pretty new relationship after divorcing a few years ago, and my relationship now is very different. And we're both middle age or past middle age,
mhm,
and we've both had very long previous marriages, and so you're both coming with a very inherited set of beliefs and way of living
yeah,
and thinking, especially about yourself. That does take time to adjust, but I do feel like when you are with someone who you really align with on your values and what that path for your together life looks like, then it's a totally different thing to what it sounds like we've both experienced in our
yeah,
previous relationship. Um, and so kind of with this whole topic of the path that you're on and how many of us just fall onto a path. We haven't designed that
yeah,
pathway for our life. We just have fallen into a job at a young age, and that job leads to another job and a promotion, and then it becomes a career, and it wasn't the career that you thought you might have. And likewise, you
right.
meet someone because you think now's the time that I should be married because my friends are getting married, and so you get married and
Yes,
you end up in that relationship,
exactly.
and so on. And so I know you and I talked about this before. It's so common now, isn't it, that in midlife, especially, many women
Mhm,
are hitting that pause button or stop button even and going, whoa, this is not how I thought life was going to be,
yeah.
and wanting to change that, aren't they? And do you think that's related to just recognizing where you are age wise and menopause, hormonal related? Is it some of, we've hit that
Yeah,
ceiling literally where we can't take any more?
yeah. Well, for me, the turning point, definitely my back, I think, put me on a journey maybe a little faster. Thank goodness that I was having those back problems, because it forced me to have to do some things differently. But ultimately, what was born out of that whole process of really trying to work on getting well was I mean, when I said I was going to quit on mental health, I actually did step away from working as a therapist for a year and a half. I maintained like a couple clients a week, but I had gone from, 30 plus clients and a full blown, practice with employees to just, 1 or 2 hours a week. My husband went back to construction out of necessity. We, lo and behold, did not go bankrupt. So, all my worst fears didn't come to fruition. Surprising how that tends to happen. And that year and a half was a journey back for me of just figuring out, who are you, Debbie? Who do you want to be? And taking responsibility for that. And it was work. I mean, I felt like I was in this mental fog and I could hardly string. I was so burnt out mentally, emotionally, and physically that I could hardly string like three tasks together without feeling anxious. And the idea of even having my own business, continuing with my own business, just was so stressful for me that I just refused to even think about it. And, but as I got better and I became very intentional about, again, who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, I put my marriage on a path that I didn't have full control over. So as I began to change and get happier, my husband became more resentful because it was forcing him to do things that he didn't want to do. We ended up moving to another state. He had to sell his horses and his ranch. And while he was verbally agreeing to all these decisions internally, he really wasn't happy with these things at all. So, ultimately, of course, it ended up in a separation and divorce. But for me, what came out of that, what was born out of that, was a program that I created for women called The Path Less Traveled. Because one of the things that I came to realize was that, all the work that I did with women over the years, and then looking at my own life, we as women, we do get to be this age. And I think it starts to happen in our 30s, but definitely, as we come into our 40s and 50s, we become even more aware of it. But by mid 30s, life has already taken a turn that we didn't expect. We have these unmet expectations. We have these disappointments, and we come to these crossroad moments, and we come to these at more than one time in our lives. But every time we come to them, we have a decision. Do I keep going down the familiar path? I don't like to I don't like to use the term comfortable, like our comfort zone, because often it's not comfortable, but it is familiar. So, and often it's this path that we can see for miles ahead because we've been traveling it. We know what it looks like. We know what is ahead. We know it's not pleasant, but it is familiar. The relationship that we don't necessarily love, the choices that we know, we know the consequences attached to them, whatever that might be. Uh, at least, at least we know. So the ruts that are there, the hurdles, the obstacles that are there, we often end up still traveling down that same path. And what I really want women to understand is that there is a different path. Yes, we can't see past the bend in the road in that path, right? There's unknowns. And I'm not saying that that path isn't going to be filled with some challenges ahead too, but that path is the path of intentionality. That's the path of saying, no one else is responsible for my well-being except me. So if I'm not happy with who I am, if I don't like where my life is, I can continue down the path of saying it's everybody else's fault, it's situations out of my control, or I can say no, it's up to me to do something different. And once I
Mm.
set myself on the in motion on that path, there may be some things that happen that were unexpected and unprepared for, but at least I'm taking full responsibility for the new path that I'm on.
Mm. And I think a lot of us kind of know that, don't we? But again, it's
Yeah.
that fear of, oh, this isn't how I wanted to go. And I know certainly with myself, if I'd been really honest, which, I think I was being honest, but then I was squishing it down back inside because
Yeah.
that honesty about the relationship not being right and what that was playing out like to the rest of my life, including professionally, as well as my health, just seemed like it was so big and so impossible. You know, I had a daughter, and disrupting her life and world just seemed
Yeah,
impossible to do. You know, there was so many practical things, financial elements, family, just so many things in the mix that you would kind of start to see that path. And then, as you say, the bend and think, but then how do I do that? Oh, no,
the
just
uncertainty of it all.
let's
Yes.
try to fix what I have.
Yeah.
And, and so trying to move past that point where we know a lot of people get stuck at, where they can feel that this isn't how they want to be. And it's not just about, oh, I wish I hadn't ended up in this job, or I wish I hadn't, married this person, or I wish I lived somewhere else. Often it's much deeper, isn't it, about the alignment with
Yeah.
you and your values, which you may not even
Absolutely.
know, but we feel that this is how we are as humans and our energy. And so you kind of think, oh, I've just got to get on with it. Like, what advice would you give to someone to begin to create that intention and know that it is possible for them, even though it is going to be a more difficult path, initially at least?
Uh, we are a society that we don't like being alone with ourselves, and yet it's so critical to be able to give yourself time for self-reflection. Unknowingly, I created a lot of time for self-reflection because when I was working on getting my back to heal, I was going to the pool. I couldn't swim laps because I was a runner and I had to give up running, but I needed to do something. So I would go to the pool, I would put on a flotation belt, I'd go to the deep end, and I would just jog. And I had a lot of time to think. I couldn't put earbuds in
Mm.
because I'm in the water. I didn't even know those things could exist back then. I just had I mean, I would be there for 30, 40, 45 minutes just paddling back and forth in the deep end. And that time with my thinking was magical. It really allowed me to just slow down and go, Who are you, Debbie? What do you want to do?" Because the rest of my day
Mm.
was just filled with all the things I have to do or should be doing or need to be doing or ought to be doing. And even though I was telling clients, you need to journal, and I would journal, but 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 my brain was never fully at rest. Like, I was still thinking, I'm journaling, but I'm still thinking about, okay, what's my day going to look like? How many clients do I have? What are all my other tasks? But being in the deep end of that pool it just forced me to stop and reflect on me. I think that is critical. I think that
Mm.
women need time to start dreaming again. They need to start imagining again. They need to start remembering what they were like when they were in their early 20s and the life that was in front of them that they've stopped believing was possible. They need to start challenging those things, like, why do I think I'm never going to have whatever it is that they don't think they're going to have? And that self-reflection time is that will be the springboard to, okay, what am I going to do next? And yes, we can get overwhelmed. This is why I said at the beginning, I don't always focus all the time on the big picture because it's easy to get overwhelmed. I just simply let that self-reflection time lead me to what's the one thing I want to work on right now?
Mhm.
What's the one thing that I want to change? When I change that, when I get that in motion, it becomes this catalyst for other things. And then before I knew it, I had made multiple changes, and then I would reflect on the way I was feeling. Oh, I'm so much more at peace with myself. I look in the mirror and I'm so much happier with who I am. Maybe I'm even seeing tangible results, on, you know, because as I started to make other changes in my health and my diet, um, I gave up snacking at night, started to lose some weight. All of those things was that domino effect that just led to one change led to the next change, led to the next change. I didn't allow and one of the reasons why I didn't allow myself to do this, to worry about the future, was because I had been making so many fear-based decisions already, and I I realized in my self-reflection time that that was one of the reasons I was having back problems. So I refused to let myself worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow was going to take care of itself. Today I'm going to do this. The moment I started going, well, what if this happens or what if that happens? I would shut it down. I would shut that voice in my brain down.
Oh, yeah, I love that. So powerful. And the way you've described that there is really the process that I use in my coaching. And it was the process I didn't realize at the time I was applying to my decision of ending my marriage and then what came next.
Yeah.
And, that's obviously very personal and so on. But in the work that I do to help others improve their health, and I'm sure this is how you work and support people as
Yeah.
well, is that, those first changes and those small steps and just, yes, having the dream. So, say somebody's big, or they come and they say, I just want to be healthy. I want to feel full of energy and happy. So that's huge. That's not
It
really
is.
the
Yeah.
goal. That's the dream. Yeah. And then,
Mhm.
okay, so what would need to happen to help you to get to that place of where you feel really
Yeah.
healthy and happy? And then making those really small, very small action led goals, ones that you take
Yes.
small steps, as you say, and you just and then you forget the goals kind of thing, and you think about those small steps and you move forward with the small steps. Because what happens then is exactly what you describe, in that you start to feel the effect and the reward of those small
Yeah.
steps and new actions, and you get the ripple effects, and that's the power. That's when the
That's
magic
the
happens,
power.
isn't it? Because
Yes.
that's when, I know certainly with me in my end of relationship situation, when I started to just think, as you say, very small, not to the big future, because then it would drive me back to where I'd been many times before and scared to
Mhm.
actually end it. I would
Mhm.
focus on the smaller things, and then as you kind of got through that day and that way you
Yeah.
felt, and then the next day you kind of built that self belief of knowing that you could keep doing it, that you ticked the box. I survived that day, and actually it wasn't as bad as what I thought it might have been, and I've done this thing, and yes, I'm moving forward. And so it just
Yeah.
becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of
Yeah. It becomes a way
empowerment,
of
doesn't it?
life. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know you do
Hmm.
a lot of mindset work, and you can't be a coach without having to do tons of mindset work, but we have so many faulty and limiting beliefs about ourselves because of the situations that we go through our lives. And when you put these action steps into play, making these changes, it begins to change the way you see yourself. It begins to shift your belief system. Oh, I can do this. Oh, this is working. Oh, I can be successful at this. Okay, well, what's the next thing that I can do that I can be successful at?
Yeah. And that is how we empower ourselves and how we build
Yeah,
confidence. I work with a lot of women who come to me saying, I just don't have any confidence. And I
yeah,
believe that when you take care of yourself and you start to
yeah,
build that strong mind and body inside
yeah,
and out, that builds that confidence. Because confidence for me is all about being willing to put a bet on yourself. It's knowing that you might not know exactly how it's going to feel to make that decision or
yeah,
do that thing, and
yeah.
maybe even do it the way you want, but it's the willingness to try and to back yourself and say, yeah, I'm
Absolutely.
going to give that a go. And
Yeah.
that's what comes, isn't it, when you start to build that strong self-belief and self-worth. And
I think
that's,
what you
yeah,
just
what
said
I
is
think.
it's so critical. Confidence isn't doing it right the first time or doing it perfectly. Confidence is knowing that I'm going to make mistakes and it's okay because there's going to be something that I'm going to learn from that mistake that I can apply that's going to allow me to do it better the next time. So the confidence comes from I'm capable of learning. I'm capable of figuring this out. I just have to put one foot in front of the other and move myself forward and learn from the process of doing this.
It's that self-trust, isn't it? As I say, it's backing yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what many
Yeah.
women aren't doing. We're just surviving through life and trying to have those moments of pleasure and happiness, a lot of which are what I've heard referred to, and I like this term, like the junk happiness. It's the buying the clothes, the makeup, treating
Yeah.
yourself to a takeaway, the things that, yeah, nice in the moment, but it's not
Yeah.
the stuff that helps you to be a happy
Yeah.
person on the inside and to
Yeah.
live
Those are
that
just
way.
moments of
And
pleasure, right? Fleeting moments of
exactly.
pleasure, but they don't actually bring us inner joy, inner contentment, or peace of
Hmm.
mind. So we keep chasing
Yeah,
after those moments of pleasure. Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And so when you are intentional about the path you're on, and as you said, you may not see past that bend, which is only just very, close and in sight. It's just still the fact that you're intentional about being on that path that is the
Hmm.
power, and that can really make a difference to your overall happiness. And as we've said, we both know, and we've heard lots of people much more qualified than us talk about
Hmm.
how directly impacted your mental and physical health are to your
Yeah.
happiness and vice versa. And so it's so
It's all
important
integrated.
to be
Yeah.
intentional, yeah, to really
Yeah.
get clear about how you're living and whether the way you're living is contributing to what it is you want to feel like in your life. And that can feel tough if you've got, big
Yeah.
things and several things, but
Yeah.
definitely doing it sooner rather than later. And I think that midlife point is kind of critical because it is midlife or thereabouts, and it's a time when you do
You're
reflect
taking
and
stock, right?
yeah,
I've
exactly.
only got half of my life left. What am I doing with myself? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's also
exactly.
really important. I think it's really important that, you as a coach, I as a coach, we help women find that first actionable step that they have believability in that they can really change. I think that's really key. And it can't, I always say it can't be, the outcome can't rely on anybody else. It has to be, I like to say, find a goal that is a process goal that, you know, the process of you doing something is the goal itself, not the outcome. And I use a lot of times the example of like when I wrote my book, my goal wasn't to sell 1 million copies. I don't have full control over that. My goal was to get it written, and then I can set goals on how I'm going to market it, right? How I'm going to distribute it. But if I tie my success or feeling like a success or a failure to results that I don't have full control over, then now my stress level rises again. Now my happiness is tied to that. So I don't let my happiness be tied to things that aren't fully under my control. And that can be a tough thing. But it is so critical to this piece of, getting on this path of intentionality.
Yeah, that is so important because uh, we're in this world where we want everything straight away, and we're sold the
Yeah.
story of what will bring us happiness and
Yes.
needing to have
Yes.
all of those, as you say, like the big things rather than
Yeah.
being realistic about what's in our control. And
Yeah.
actually, when we break it down in that way and live more aligned to that,
Hmm.
we end up getting those things, but we're happier on the journey to them, aren't we? Because we,
Hmm.
as you said, we're focused instead on what's in our control and those process type goals. And that's, the for me anyway, I do believe that's the things that create real happiness and pleasure
Yeah.
and joy and experience fulfillment, all of those wonderful
Yeah.
things along the way, rather than
Yeah.
thinking, well, I'll only be happy when I've got the big mansion
Ugh,
house, for example,
yes.
and
Stop
then
living in the
you
future.
hold yourself back.
Yeah,
Yeah, you hold yourself back
yeah,
from enjoying maybe that
yes,
process of trying a new business or going for a job and getting that promotion and saving up and
yeah,
so on. And yeah, so much
absolutely.
wisdom there.
Living in the moment. What do you love about your life right now? And yeah, you're
Hmm.
moving yourself towards some destination, but life is great right now. What aspect of your life is great right now that you can be celebrating for sure?
Yeah, and I think if that's a question that triggers something for you and doesn't feel like a question you're able to give an answer to, or you just
Mhm.
say there isn't anything, then you know that this path you're on needs to change. And that's
Is the
why,
wrong one.
as
Yeah,
we've said, only you can do that. You can do it.
yeah,
And often you may need help and support from people
yeah.
like us or even family, friends, and so on. But
Hmm.
ultimately, you need to do it, but also know that you are strong enough and good enough and capable enough of making that happen, because that's often, as we start with, what holds people back in that place of
Yeah,
fear and
yeah,
freeze, that you
yeah.
just end up staying where you are.
And no matter how old you
Brilliant.
are, it's never too late to choose a different path. I mean,
Mm,
I remarried at,
exactly.
I just turned 55 and I remarried 3 years ago. And, I work with so many women who just think, I mean, I work with women in their 30s who aren't married yet, who just think that their life is over, because they're
Mm,
already in their 30s and they haven't found someone. I- th- It's never too late to get on the right path. Yeah.
yeah. And that comes back to those stories we tell ourselves about lots of
Hmm.
things. It's
Yeah.
things I hear like,
Yes.
I'm too old to
Absolutely.
change the way I eat. I'm too old to
Yeah.
start
It's too
exercising.
late.
I'm too
Yeah.
old to be
Yeah.
healthy. And so on. Yeah, I'm too old. This is just how it has to be. And I
Yeah.
always say to people, which is very deep, but it's a very powerful coaching tool. There's a couple of, or few ways even you can do it, but that kind of reflection back at the end of your life, to look at, has it been a
Yeah.
life that you are proud
Yeah.
to have lived?
Yeah.
And
I call it
if you're
dreaming with
not,
the end in mind.
yeah,
Yeah. Dreaming with
yeah,
the
oh,
end
I
in
like
mind.
that
Yeah.
phrase.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's certainly something that pushed me forward to finally
Yeah.
make changes in my life, because I'd lost my mum and
Mm.
she'd passed away quite suddenly with a short illness, and we were in COVID. And then I read this phenomenal book, which I talk about often, called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And I was reading that during the lockdown, sitting in the garden, and I just had so many really profound moments of, oh my God, like, I cannot get to the end of my life and have those kinds of thoughts of,
Mhm.
I wish I'd allowed myself to be happy. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish that I'd let
Yeah.
more people in, and those kinds of things. And so I think, there's actually a lot of power in looking forward to
Looking
then look
forward.
back
Yeah.
right now, rather than wait until it is too
Absolutely.
late to do something.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, I'm so,
Absolutely.
so happy to be able to share your story and hear your story as
Thanks,
well, Debbie.
Nicola.
And I'm, yeah, really just so pleased that you've written your book and you're able to tell it like this, and that you're helping so
Yeah.
many women to find that intentional path for themselves so that they can live a fuller and happier life. So I'll pop everything into the show notes for people to connect with you. But if you just want to let people
Sure.
know how they can find out more, and maybe what your book's called.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the best way to find me is through my website, debbiecaudle.com. And I would love for people to come join my private Facebook group too, because I do a lot of free relationship coaching there. I go live every 2 weeks to answer relationship questions. So, like people, they just direct message me their relationship questions, and then I anonymously answer those. And, that's a great way for people who aren't, sure if they need coaching or are ready to invest in coaching to see if we're a good fit, to see if, they like what they're hearing, but to also get some real help. So that Facebook group, you can find me by just finding me on Facebook, Debbie Caudle, and then there's a link to my private Facebook group that way as well.
That sounds like an amazing support to have there. So, yeah, definitely reach out and connect with Debbie. And as I say, the links will all be in the show notes. So, thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your knowledge and personal story, Debbie.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me today. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Oh, great. I'm pleased you enjoyed it.